Hello, welcome. Right. Let me get your names down.
Hello.
Hi. Nice.
Hello, how are you?
All right. How about you?
Pretty good.
Good. That's awesome.
Hello.
I like the interaction. Hello.
Hello.
You guys
Hi, how
doing
are
okay?
you?
Everyone doing okay?
Yeah.
Good. Good, good. Right. Yeah, this is great. I'm loving it already. So today we're getting into the English as context to their colonization. And not very, it's a bit superficial. Uh, the thesis is very one-sided, but I want you to kind of check it out. So what they do, right, is they pick and choose facts that fit. They kind of, like I say in here somewhere, they cherry pick. They cherry pick facts that are convenient and supportive to their thesis, right? And so this is the English claiming that they're exceptional. This is Whig history. Whig, W-H-I-G, they were the Liberal Party of England, and they believed and hoped that society would not through any kind of tumult, any kind of civil war or coup or anything like that, but just through legislation, through judicial decisions, etc., just gradually become more democratic and more amenable to personal liberty. Okay. And so that's what the Whig Party was hoping. And then what they contended, right, was that they were at the forefront of that evolution as a society of offering, freedom and democratic government. So that's what we try to do is we try to paint them in this picture throughout their history as being kind of a very kind of libertarian, big government, leave me alone, I demand my rights type of tradition that they supposedly inherited, and that we as Americans supposedly inherited through the English settlements. So at any rate, I just kind of go chronologically through the main chapters of the main, nationalities, demographics that immigrated or invaded England. Okay. So right off the bat, right, you have a quote from Cornelius Tacitus. This guy is a first century historian for Rome, one of the preeminent ones. And he supposedly was at a loss for the manner by which the Celtic people in what they called Britannia or ancient England, that they couldn't even unite against the Romans when they invaded because they were so kind of libertarian. They wanted to stay decentralized and stay amongst themselves as their own tribes in their own regions and so forth. And then also, right, you have this diehard attitude from a couple of the Celtic leaders. Canonicus, no, Canonicus, I'm sorry, that's a Native American name, but his name is similar to that. Yeah, Canonicus was a sachem, was a chief. Where is he? Let's see here. Tacitus. Oh, Caractacus. Yeah. So you have Caractacus here, and then you have the famous Queen Boudica, and right here. And so Queen Boudica, right? The legend states that she poisoned her daughters and then poisoned herself, uh, lest they be taken over by the Romans. And so you get that, that kind of image of the Celtic people of England, of Britannia. And let's see here. They when they established domination in England, right? The Republic was on its last knees. You're talking about 55 BC when they kind of conquered Britannia, and as you probably know, by 44 BC, there are no tribunes left. The tribunes were the elected officials, right? You just had a senate, and you had a couple people vying to be the consul, and no longer calling it a consul, but calling it now an emperor, right? So they kind of saw the ugly side of Rome, instead of the Republican side. But nevertheless, the argument goes is that Rome, the only thing lasting that Rome left, besides a little bit of blood through intermarriage, was architecture. They have like some of the old famous public bathhouses, the canal system with a reservoir, and the colonnaded bridges, etc. So you have those, you have our architecture for sure. But England was declared a low priority when the Vandals and the Ostrogoths and other Germanic tribes and the Huns, who were not Germanic, began descending on Rome to conquer it, right? Between 410 and 425 AD. And so at any rate, when that happened, they made the soldiers in England, in Britannia, the Roman soldiers leave. And so the idea is that there wasn't much of a Roman influence on England as much as there was on Spain as another colonizer. And remember with Spain, right, the Visigoths who took over at the fall of Rome, it's very much an anomaly. It stands out. It's not usual. The Germanic conquerors actually did much to retain things Roman, with the language, with the constitution and laws, etc. Right? The development of cities and into dioceses, etc. They copied a lot from the Romans, even though they had conquered them. That was not the case here, right? The Angles and Saxons, from which we get the term Anglo-Saxon, the Angles and Saxons were from primarily the German states, but also Denmark and Belgium. And they came and were Germanic in culture, Germanic in language. And it says, right, that when they came, they were deliberately decentralized. Let's see here. Let's see. Sorry. Yeah, right here. Back in their homelands in modern Germany, Denmark, Schleswig and Holstein, the Germanic Saxons, like the Angles, divided themselves up into several tribes, each tribe under its own king or chief. Okay. Each Germanic group of people had its own laws and its own historic traditions. Okay. So supposedly, right, that was helpful for England getting a taste of having some local autonomy, right? Whereby everything is decentralized on purpose. And so they don't have this unified empire under one autocratic ruler, okay, when the Angles and Saxons took over. Also, with the Angles and Saxons, what's interesting is the Witten. Should have it here somewhere. But the Witten, right, was like a city council for a village ostensibly of 100. And I can't help but think that Thomas Jefferson had read about the Angles and Saxons, because he used that term himself, that he would like villages of 100 in his vision of the yeoman farmers in the South. So at any rate, yeah, you have these Wittens, spelled W-I-T-A-N, there it is. And along with that, you had a court. And the court, right, was of people, inhabitants of that 100-person village. So really, right, you could make the argument that the Angles and Saxons practiced trial by a jury of your peers, as well as a local representative government with the Wittens. Okay, so the English are proud of that. Okay, let's see here. And then also in the cities, right? Bourgeois just means of the city, right? So they began, and this really, though, to be honest, you guys, this happened everywhere. This happened in Spain, how they try to act like Spain was so backward. Spain had the same thing. They were called fueros. But at any rate, the people in the city began to experience more autonomy in establishing like a guild and becoming a skilled worker of one sort or another, of establishing contacts with people outside the region, sometimes even outside the country, if it was a coastal city. And what happens, right, is usually when you get a demographic that begins to do well for itself economically, it doesn't take long and they start demanding political rights. Okay. So this is the common narrative, right? Like if you take the latter half of US history and you do the civil rights movement, people point to the GI Bill, right? Paying for college and paying helping on an FHA loan for any soldier, including soldiers of color, and the booming war industry continuing with the Cold War arms race, right, in the 1950s, and so that it helped develop a quote colored middle class, and that it's not a coincidence that many of the civil rights leaders had a college education. Okay, so at any rate, like this, the bourgeoisie, they start doing well for themselves economically, and they make demands politically, and they are exempt from certain taxes, from certain legislation, etc. There was a Latin term at the time in the Middle Ages that said, city air makes one free. And so, however that looks in Latin, I know not. But at any rate, so that was a phenomenon under the Angles and Saxons as well. And then you had the Danes, right? Like in the 800s and 900s. And the Danes from Denmark, you don't have Wittens, you don't have trial by peers, you don't have decentralization. You have, but what you do have is you have a dual legal system. Okay. So when the Danes came in, it literally was called Dane law. There was Dane law, and then there was English common law for the English. So it was a dual system. And that, of course, afforded the English people some autonomy, right? Not having to live under the Danes' system of government. So that's about all I got from that one, from the chapter of the Danes, to be honest. And then after the Danes, right, you have the Normans, right, which was a misnomer from the word Norseman, from Norway. And the Normans, right, they had conquered Western France. At that time, it was actually beginning to be called France, because yeah, it was Gaul under the Romans, and then the Franks took it over, from which they got the term France. But at any rate, they take over Western France, and then they decide William the Conqueror, the second, he was actually in the bloodline, I believe, like a nephew to the gentleman who dies on the throne without an heir in England. So he felt he had as good as legitimate of entitlement as anybody else. And so he invades across the English Channel, England from Normandy on D-Day on June 6, 1066. So with the Norman invasion, right, one thing was pretty clear, is that economically, it did not go well for the Anglo-Saxon nobility. They engaged in land redistribution. They took from the nobility, and he gave it to his loyal loyal Norsemen who had fought with him. And but at the same time, right, present day Scotland was free from the Norman rule, and so was Wales. And so they have been able to withstand invasions so well. They've had such diverse immigration into their regions. Matter of fact, if I can remember correctly, I believe Wales comes from a Celtic word that means foreigners. They had so many foreigners in Wales. So at any rate, they didn't conquer all of it, William the Conqueror, etc. And there was always an uprising against him. And of course, the English are proud of that, right? Always fighting against tyranny. And then after that, you have the Magna Carta. And you see here, right, the Great Charter. Article 20 forbade the king from excessively fining subjects for small offenses. Article 39 declared trial by a jury of peers. Article 40 claimed equality of legal protection under the law for all, whereby the king was prohibited from breaking English laws. Okay, so hence it's the rule of law. Okay, so that was big for 1215. That was a big deal. And of course, right, revisionists are correct that the nobility were fighting for their own rights, right, with interacting with the king. They weren't so worried about the bourgeois middle class in the cities, and they certainly weren't worried about the peasants working as serfs and indentured servants and sharecroppers elsewhere. All right. So at any rate, so you have the Magna Carta, and that was pretty big. And then you had the English Civil War. All right. King Charles I tries to contend that he has the divine right to rule as he pleases. He shuts down Parliament. Everything
So
okay?
everybody's just going off this fucking crazy dude.
Anyway, so the English Civil War, parliamentary forces end up prevailing over the king. They try him for abuse of power and abuse of in stepping on their English rights, and they actually beheaded him, Charles I. Yeah. So that was known as the English Civil War. That was another step toward greater popular participation. Then there's one more right here, the Glorious Revolution. All right. And with the Glorious Revolution, they declared the reign of James II over for similar reasons. And they brought in William of Orange from the Netherlands to and Mary. And but note this, right? They first had to sign a whoever has that, could you guys try to mute that? Thank you. But at any rate, by all means, if you want to talk, that's completely different. I'd love to have you talk anytime, but just kind of that ambient noise was getting loud. So at any rate, with the Glorious Revolution, they swore allegiance to jointly rule with the Parliament and to submit themselves to English common law, to the Constitution. All right. So those are, in a way, those last three are a little bit impressive as far as having a heritage, right, that's kind of intolerant of tyranny and demanding of people's rights. So anyway, I tried to give them my best shot, but no, right, I cherry picked. I could have found evidence of tyrannical kings and queens, inequity with the nobility owning most of the land and other people having to work on their land. There, you could find that too, just like in any country. Okay. So at any rate, what I'm going to do, I'm going to stop this one.
Oh, you break the line of communication, and you break the law
What line of communication?
from cell to cell.
Let's see here. All right, so this one, right, is the Southern colonies. Capitalism for better and for worse. All right. So on this one, basically, you find growing opportunities for the common man that's not noble. All right. You have, for instance, you have more merchant rights. You have more kind of like the Spanish. They allowed people to go out freely and trade in commodities in these new lands in Asia and then in the Americas, and also to colonize. You also had stock companies, and the joint stock companies are going to ask for commoners to do their dirty work, right? Because most of them, right, are the wealthy. They have too much to lose, so they put the lion's share of funds into the joint stock company.
What you do?
Whatever share they put in, right, that's the share that they get out of the profit. And so you have others who have no money to give, but they're willing to go and be an adventurer and try to settle, try to conquer, etc. All right. And so you have that new opportunity.
I have a question. Sorry, I don't mean to interrupt.
That's all right.
So, if we're interested in, like, for example, this capitalism, where can we find more information on it? Like, if this article like really strikes your interest and you want more information on it, how do you find?
You know what? For one, right? Give me just a moment. Let's see here. I would highly recommend Jonathan Levy's book right here. This is Jonathan Levy, and it says Ages of American Capitalism, a History of the United States. And it starts obviously like as a precursor to the colonial era. And it's very, very intelligent book.
Okay, can you get like at that like a library, or do you have to go to like Barnes and Noble and get it?
You know what? I got it from Amazon.
Oh, Amazon. Okay, okay.
Uh-huh. And I've had great luck. I don't know about you guys, but I've had great luck buying used books on Amazon. And when they have said that it's in good shape, it's always been in good shape. It's awesome. So yeah, I would recommend that book. I'm kind of in the middle of it now, and that guy knows his stuff. That's for sure. But did I answer your question? Does that help?
Yes, thank you so much. Yeah, because I'm also in another subject. We're reading about capitalism.
Right.
So I just figured, read up on it. So like, and I don't want to like always go to the internet because it's like, you know, sometimes they don't give you the right information, and then you go out, oh yeah, well this according to, Google.com,
Yeah.
and was laughing at you, and I was like, I'm not doing that again.
No, exactly. That's true. That's very true. So yeah, but yeah, I would think that book you would really enjoy that book.
Right.
And so with this, right, I mean, they're beginning to do that. They're beginning to loosen the reins of mercantilism and to allow commoners and middle class people to do as they please economically. Of course, as long as, right, as they pay a tenth to the Anglican Church, and they've gone back and forth between a tenth and 20%, just like Spain, to the government. And so at any rate, when you have this, right, you have another opportunity, and that is indentured servitude, right? You have people that come and buy large plots of land, and they don't want to do the labor themselves. So you volunteer as an indentured servant between 3 to 7 years. And when you are done, you are supposed to receive your freedom dues. Your freedom dues are a trade that they teach you so that you could stand on your own feet economically, food and clothing, and also land. And the generic term they used was a freehold. And a freehold is the minimal amount of land to be a citizen, to be able to be considered a subject or
Chaos,
citizen.
essentially. They were
of
all
the-
working in tandem at one point, and one link in the chain broke, the entire thing got disorganized.
So, Jess, is that you, Jess, with the talking?
It's true, Gussie.
See here. All right, so there was a guy named George Alsop, and he was in Maryland, and he became the spokesperson for indentured servitude. Okay, to him, right, it's likened to like, working a menial job while you're in college, right? And then when you finish college, you're ready to get your respectable job. And so George Alsop was a big spokesman for it. But not to generalize too much, but from what I've read, Maryland had a great reputation for how they treated their indentured servants, and Virginia did not. Now, granted, most of the books that I've read on Virginia were conflict history, right? So they're looking for conflict, for drama, for victimization, exploitation, etc. They're highlighting that. But like I said, that's what I've come across personally in my readings. So then there was an uglier side, and that is, right, is that, like I said, sometimes people didn't receive their freedom dues, And a lot of the have-nots who did not receive freedom dues moved west to the Piedmont. And those who ruled, who were repeatedly elected into the assembly or handpicked into the royal council, and the governor, of course, handpicked, they oftentimes were on the East Coast, which was known as the Tidewater region. So you have the Tidewater elite, and then you have the Piedmont poor in the West. Okay, and it was quite a dichotomy between the two. So at any rate, yeah, you have you're going to end up having Bacon's Rebellion in 1676.
Is she gonna kill him?
Was a poor man's rebellion against the establishment. It's a very fascinating tale. Okay. Also, the headright system. The homeowner or the landowner receives 50 to 100 acres for every laborer that he brings over and employs. So imagine if you brought like 50 laborers, that's going to add up to a lot of acreage. So you have that as well. And then, like I said, with the joint stock companies, whatever percentage you put in, that's the percentage of profit that you receive. And so the wealthy had a leg up. So there were burgeoning opportunities for the poor, but there were also it was also the same as elsewhere, right? The rich had a big advantage over the humble demographics. All right. Number 2 is conflict history on Jamestown. All right. And I will say this, right? Because I need to kind of speed up. But with this one, right? Look at this. Before that they perceive you mean to plant among them, right? They will grow discontented with your habitation. So build a military fort with an invulnerable facade and do not sell your guns to them. So, right, that is the classic ugly imperialist.
Yeah.
They're saying, we're not wanted. We know we're not going to be wanted, but we're coming anyway to get what we want. And also being outnumbered, right? Being so greatly outnumbered by the Powhatan Confederacy, they're going to try to use deterrence
She done fucked
instead
herself
of
off.
kind of overture to them. So deterrence, right, is when you make someone afraid of attacking you. Okay, you make someone afraid of attacking you.
Now they're inviting actual barbarians on.
Let's see here. So they went into Posbeheg territory because there were a dozen tribes underneath Powhatan, the leader, and the Posbeheg were one of them. And they go into their territory and they put a cross up and they claim the land. And the sub sachem, the sub chief, called the Werewants, was the son of Powhatan, and he was just perplexed, like, what are they doing here? Why? What does this cross mean, etc. So he reports to the dad, and the dad wants to he wants to talk with their leader. And what was apparent is that they were following
What is that?
Smith. And so he captures John Smith, and we only have John Smith's account of this, where he claims that they were looking as if they were going to beat him to death in a ritual, and a young 12-year-old named Pocahontas threw herself over the top of him and spared his life. So who knows? But it could have been, anthropologists say, a test of courage into adopting him as a Werewants, as a sub-chief. Because that's what Powhatan says. He says, I want you to go back, get those guns, and bring them back to me. And of course, he doesn't do that. So it's just constant distrust. The English are depicted in this book as being constantly ungrateful, deceitful, etc.
Professor Cowell?
Yeah.
I'm not sure if it would be helpful, but if the background noise is getting too bad, you can mute any participants that are still unmuted in the participants tab.
Oh, I see.
I mean, you see where the participants tab is, and then just go to where they are, and then
Oh,
mute
thank
them.
you. Thank you very much. That's great. Yeah, I didn't know that.
Also,
It's helpful. It can help minimize distractions.
Yeah,
I had a question. So I was wondering about when you're saying the English, is that all the people from England, not including Spain?
right. Yeah, yeah. I don't know. Like when we get into the early settlements, I don't, because no, shoot. David Hackett Fisher has a book, and he talks about the gentry class dominating everything. And then he said only a handful of handpicked counselors were non-English. And that drove me crazy because I thought they're non-English. Where are they from? Right? What nationality?
Yeah.
So to be honest, I haven't read that yet. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Yeah, but because they were not absolutely 100% homogeneously English. Um, but yeah, that shame on me for not knowing that. I apologize. Uh, but obviously, whatever countries they were from, they constituted a very small minority. But that I still should know that, and I don't. I'm sorry.
But what were the Spaniards that colonized in the Americas? Were any of them like were able to live in cohesion with the Native Americans, or were they all depicted as in like the articles saying the ruthless things that they did, trying to be greedy?
No, you know what? I think they did. I think there were places in which they did. In the major cities, right? They usually had a bigger confederation of natives, so they would set them apart as repúblicas de indios, like Indian republics. So, and they kept them together, segregated, in whatever part of the city. But outside the big cities, you had Native Americans. You had plenty of Native Americans in Mesoamerica and South America that were not part of an Indian republic, and they were of course very low on the totem pole, but nevertheless they were free to intermarry. As far as 1513, they had the miscegenation law passed in Spain, so
Okay.
they could intermarry with Spaniards, and but most of the time, right, they segregated by class when it came to the cities and neighborhoods.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Most of the time they did. They segregated by class, and then doing so by class, right, usually inadvertently caused it to be by ethnicity also, because so many of the poor were natives. But no, it could and did happen. And the same thing with the African Americans, with the Africans. Those who bought their freedom, a lot of them intermarried with Spaniards and with mestizos, etc.
Mhm.
And yeah, matter of fact, I would say that the Spanish were more prone, more open to engage in syncretism, right, where they mix with each other much more than the English would.
Okay.
I feel safe drawing that conclusion.
That's good to hear that they weren't all the stereotype that they're kind of getting in some of these articles. That's
Yeah,
viewing it, but I'm like, surely there's got to be some type of people who were able to get along with the natives and not have greed drive them.
for sure. And you know what? There's also oh gosh, um, Bernard Balin has a book on the colonies, and he talks about the fraternization of the poor white and poor black Southerners, and especially places of recreation. They would oftentimes go and dance and drink together, and sometimes have intimacy, etc. And to an alarming degree that the to in the eyes of the rulers, where they deliberately tried to put a stop to it in kind of divide and conquer fashion. Yeah, it's fascinating.
Very cool. Thank you.
Uh-huh. So with number three, oh my goodness, this is so politically incorrect. He states, right, that that John Smith is the quintessential future look at the future American leader. He's not too idealistic, he's more pragmatic, right? Do whatever works, yields the best practical results. He's tough. He takes the initiative. He has just a certain sagacity, like worldly wisdom to him, that helps him to gain credibility in the eyes of the other settlers. Remember, he called twice. He called it when the natives were going to attack. And the leaders, who happened to be just the richest guys who put the most money in, did not listen to him. He told them not to put their weapons down when they trade. And one of them learned the hard way with that. And so, you know what I mean? So all of these things just help him to grow in his reputation and his credibility with the English Jamestown people. But like I said, what's sad to me is from the very beginning, it is like us against them. And we got to protect ourselves. They're not going to like us here. Don't give them any of our guns, etc. Like there were no, not much of an attempt to really reach out and try friendship, try an alliance. You know what I mean? You just don't read much of that at all in Virginia at Jamestown. So at any rate, yeah, you have that. And then meritocracy, right? He was a commoner. He didn't have the money to put into the joint stock company, so he became an adventurer. And so he showed how you could rise, right, by talent. That was a gutsy, this was like around 2000. That's a gutsy thesis, right? Very politically incorrect. To side with him. Now this one, slavery and economic, not a racist decision. I squirmed putting this together, okay? But I felt like the data that was given by David Breon Davis in his book, Inhuman Bondage, he kind of said it without saying it. So I'm like, you know what? I'm just gonna say it, right? And that is that the choice to use black slaves was pragmatic. It was practical. It was economically centered. All right. And if you know me, right, the next section will be different. So on this one, right, you have in the classic narrative of this, you have them try two different demographics as laborers instead. The Native Americans, and that was stopped by a few things. One was disease. They didn't have a good immunity to European disease. Secondly, they could easily abscond and run away and blend in with any other tribe, and it was difficult to find them. And then thirdly, treaties. We were trying to make peace because war is costly. If you could avoid it, that's better. And so we were trying to make these trade agreements with the different tribes, and we knew that would get in the way of that if we started enslaving some of their members. So for those reasons, right, we didn't use natives very long. We didn't try very long. And then with the white indentured servants, right, I mainly think of Bacon's Rebellion. It's 3 to 7 years, and then you're supposed to get your freedom dues, and a lot of them didn't. So they began to fight in the West against the Doeg tribe. The governor said, do not do that. That's tantamount to treason. And they fought anyway. They knew that they could be executed for treason. And so they'd already crossed the line. So what the heck, they thought. They marched to the East Coast and took on the militia. And they defeated it. And they declared a People's Republic of Virginia. And then, of course, Nathaniel Bacon got dysentery and he died, and it just kind of flopped, the whole movement after that. But it scared the heck out of the establishment. And you actually have notes from the House of Burgesses, the assembly, the elected assemblymen in Virginia, stating that indentured servants, they expect too much. They're too entitled. Which makes them a volatile force to employ. All right. So then you contrast that, right, with African slaves that are coming in coffles and chains and collars, etc. And to them, their life is virtually over already, from the looks on their faces, etc. So that supposedly they're already more broken, and hence they're more likely to be docile. And of course, they developed a reputation for being hardier physically, than the Native Americans, and evidently there are some close ecosystem connections between South Carolina, for instance, and the Ivory Coast of Africa. And so they developed an immunity to malaria. So they weren't getting sick and dying. And so that was another plus for the planters. And then, right, you're going to have the rise and fall of African kingdoms in the mid 1600s. So if my memory serves me correctly, I think the Asante or the Ashanti, they began to crumble. There were like two other kingdoms that rose up. But at any rate, right, they both the fall of kingdoms and the rise of kingdoms, for two different reasons, obviously, increased the number of slaves that had been captured in Africa as prisoners of war. So they are brought into the Caribbean, and they experience, right? It's just horrible, horrible saying this. I really do. I feel horrible saying this because they're human beings, but they experienced a glut in the supply. There were too many slaves for there to be enough demand to buy them. So sadly, like a commodity, their price went down. And so it became, according to David Breon Davis, right? So that you would pay 3/4 of the cost of a slave for an indentured servant only 3 to 7 years. Or you could pay just a quarter more and you get a slave for life. And if you have a female, you get her children and her children's children, etc. Right? So sadly, it became a good economic deal for them to employ African slaves. It was just kind of a marriage made in hell for the slaves. Right? Now, I'll tell you what's also pretty dark is that they would have a tradition of not employing all slaves from the same tribe in civilization. They didn't want them to know each other. They didn't want them to know each other's languages, right? The whole divide and conquer thing. There's evidence of that. Yeah, Bryce?
So I was wondering, so it's mainly the language because, like, is that what kind of made them different? Like they couldn't communicate, so they just kind of put them to work, and they couldn't see like too much or hear too much of what like they're feeling, so they just kind of discarded them. Was it the language mainly?
Yes, I think it was primarily the language, because when I read about like them practicing facets to their religion, they all shared it. They all had they all were familiar with those same practices, those same religious practices. So yeah, there definitely was some cultural uniformity, but with the exception, like you said, Bryce, of language. Absolutely. And remember, some people, though, it wasn't always that way, right? Some had preferences. Some liked, I've read about a couple tribes in particular that were highly represented in the colonies, the Igbo and the Yoruba. A lot of Igbo and Yoruba slaves. And then also from the French, right? They pretty much got the Dahomey from the Dahomey tribe. So when you saw that movie not too long ago of the women fighters, that was their tribe, the Dahomey. All right, and so at any rate, then the next one, right, says we inherited racism and then we deliberately fomented it. We like a blanket on a fire. We encouraged it, right?
Well, I had a quick question about the last one that we talked about. Just
Sure,
about the indentured servants, right? And those are the temporary
sure.
servants. And what makes the time change? Since you said 3 to 7 years, I'm pretty sure. So what
Uh-huh.
makes it 3 years and what makes it 7 years? Was it the pricing or was it the certain person or
Oh,
what was it?
I am so sorry, Griffin. I don't have an answer for that. I'm sorry.
No problem, no problem.
I tell you what, man. I promise you guys. My kid can attest to it. My little boy. makes him a little jealous with time and stuff. I read all the time, but I don't know that answer either. I'm sorry, Griffin.
No problem, no problem. It was just a curious question.
Sure, but no, I still should have known that, and I don't, unfortunately. So at any rate, and by the way, I'm getting the information on this racism from Ibram Kendi, Kendi, Ibram. He's real popular right now. He's younger than I am, African American, and he's got like 2 or 3 books that have won some big awards as a professor on the East Coast. But yeah, so I have a couple of his books, and I'm getting this information from them, from Ibram Kendi. All right. But Aristotle, I don't even want to say some of these. They're so terrible. It's the stereotypes and descriptions. Ibn Khaldun, Gomez de Gerara. Okay. There was another guy named Leo Africanus. But no, right? Ibram Kendi catches one of them, and it's the Portuguese guy, Gerara. He was hired by a Portuguese joint stock company that wanted permission to trade in slaves. So he had an ulterior motive, right? He's wanted to dehumanize them and try to get the Portuguese to be willing to do such a thing, right? So that's important to remember as well. And then, of course, with a lot of them, they were very limited in how much of Africa they saw, how long they were there, etc. Right? Just getting a brief window, and then bam. And so historians are hard on chroniclers like that, as they should be, as they absolutely should be. So as you guys might know, we're going to get into a chronicler visiting our country that his book is just fascinating, but a lot of people don't buy into it, and that's Alexei de Tocqueville, Democracy in America, during the age of Jackson. That'll be interesting. But at any rate, yeah, so these guys are serving as foreign visiting chroniclers. And the things that these have in common, right? These awful things, bestial sloths so that they're lazy, dumb animals so that they're not intelligent, they're naturally submissive. They basically follow their id, as one of them says that they're like sexual predators or something like that. But you put it all together, right? And it makes the Sambo image, SAMBO, the African American, happy-go-lucky, ignorant, happy in his chains slave that the minstrel shows would demonstrate all throughout the South, sadly. And so, at any rate, you have people like George Best and John Pori, who go out of their way to bring these works to Virginia and have them translated. So they're overtly trying, right, to spread this stuff, to spread this sentiment. And then, of course, there was racist legislation right off the bat. Hugh Davis had intimate relations with a black woman and was whipped for it. And look what it says: abusing himself to the dishonor of God and shame of Christians by defiling his body and lying with a Negro woman. Okay. And then you have Anthony Johnson. In the court cases, it's called Antonio the Negro. But at any rate, he got out of slavery as a black man, as an African man, and he became a planter himself, owning slaves, and which did happen. And he, during the holidays, he had 2 properties. He was so well off, and he went to his properties in Maryland to visit family. And when he returns to Virginia, they had confiscated his land. And he said, "Wait a minute, I'm not in. I paid my taxes, my property taxes. I haven't committed a crime." And they said, "No, we believe that it is improper for a man of your color to own land in Virginia." Just that simple. Yeah, Anthony Johnson. And then John Punch. John Punch was one of three runaway indentured servants under the same indentured program at the same time. And two of them had what was left of their term doubled. And the third one, simply because he was black, was sentenced for life. And that was John Punch. All right. And then African American agency. With this one, right, is just there were jobs there were jobs that no one else wanted to do. There was a sense of desperation for lack of sufficient resources and people in South Carolina in its early days. And the slaves took advantage of such by demanding some type of remuneration, some type of reward for being willing to do what others didn't want to do. It's that simple in this book. So for instance, right, making tar and pitch as the glue or adhesive for ships. Evidently, you know, you cut the sap, you cut a V into a tree, a certain kind of tree, and you have the sap go into this like metal vat, and then you have it boil. And oftentimes, right, you were easily burnt, and it burned your skin off. And evidently, it was very disagreeable labor, and they volunteered to do it. There also was, like the football team, there was some genus of panther that was attacking people in the early days of South Carolina. And so they actually gave them guns to hunt them. Okay, yeah. And that's kind of an anomaly. I don't know of any other colony that gave the African Americans guns. There's another one as well. I'm trying to think. But at any rate, you guys get the picture. Oh, and then defend against the Native American slave trade. The Mississippian tribes that were allied with the French were being paid by the French to take British colonists as slaves and sell them in the Caribbean. And so they were to protect different homesteads and so forth. Okay. So at any rate, that's what they did. And so some of them received manumission. Some of them were freed. And then there were lots of other more minor concessions, like kind of like something tantamount to like half freedom, where certain times of the year they could live with their family autonomously, and then they would have to come and show up for some type of labor for the master at certain times of the year. But by the way, this is going to be temporary, sadly, because this was owned by a joint stock company when these African Americans did this, and the royal crown is going to make it a royal colony, and then they're going to try to undo all of the success that the Africans had experienced, sadly. So that South Carolina, in some ways, becomes gains a reputation for being one of the most inequitable, backward states of the South. And then Native American agency with the French is, remember, you read this one, and sometimes the Native Americans look immoral. Like, for instance, right, they'd cut a deal with the French, and then a little bit later, they'd demand more. And the French were like, no, wait a minute, we'd already made an agreement. We signed on it. They're like, no, well, too bad. We know that you're desperate right now, and we want this in addition to what you promised in the initial deal, right? And like I said, you know, I was reading this book by Usner, and it, you know, a couple of times I just kind of shook my head like, oh, you naughty Native Americans. But remember, when it comes to agency, they're proud of that, right? They're proud that they made decisions that mattered. They had free will like anybody else, and they helped determine the course of events just the same as anybody else. Okay. And then, as you see in number 8, the last one following this one, the French just did not bring enough resources over to have their way with the nearby Native American tribes. They didn't bring enough soldiers. They didn't bring enough farmers. They didn't have enough food. They didn't have enough guns and supplies. And so in that desperate condition, the Native Americans took advantage of that on the lower Mississippi River and down, especially around Louisiana. And Louisiana and the state of Mississippi. Right. And then lastly, right, fluid by accident is you have a quote from Governor de Bienville of New Orleans. They established it in 1713. Okay. And he tells the French crown, right, if we don't get our supply of goods within the next season, I'm going to declare open trade. And that means including pirates, right, who were involved in trade in the Gulf of Mexico. So at any rate, right, they didn't bring enough men. They didn't bring enough soldiers. They didn't bring enough skilled workers. And they never got the number of goods that they coveted. So, right, begrudgingly, the Creole leaders, remember Creole is just like the Spanish, they're proud of being purely French, but born here in the US. The Creole leaders just kind of, they give in, they acquiesce, and they allow people not to have papers. They could do what they want for a living. They started taking Native American women, and they said, okay, at the very least, you're going to marry them in the Catholic Church, they said, right? And so that happened. They made demands as far as forming a militia for emergencies. They made demands upon the Creole leaders in that sense. And then, like I said, even including infamous pirates were allowed to trade with them because they desired those goods and they weren't getting them from France. Okay. So at any rate, French Louisiana became very fluid. You could rise and fall by your efforts and merit and skill, and make many autonomous decisions in your life as far as what you want to do for a living, who you want to marry, if you want to serve in the military or not, etc. Right? But that type of fluidity was not intended. It was just simply they didn't have enough resources to impose their will. Not enough soldiers in particular. All right. So any questions on that?
I had a question about it's kind of correlated with it.
Sure.
Is there a government forming in like a new Spain government forming in like Native American territory, or was it controlled by Spain and it was like a control center kind of sending messages via something? Or how did
with Spain, I mean, it's kind of I would kind of say, Bryce, that it was somewhere in the middle. On paper, right? On paper, of course, they are under the Castilian crown. They're under the Castilian crown and under the person of the viceroy who's sent to them.
Mhm.
And those who make their laws are called the Council of the Indies, and they're Spaniards back in Spain. And so, absolutely on paper, until their wars for independence, obviously, from 1810 through the 1820s, they ostensibly, technically were absolutely under Spain. But in reality, did you have them, kind of when the cat's away, the mice will play phenomenon? Absolutely. Absolutely. And so you had people making unilateral decisions, and feeling like they had the distance to be able to do so. So for instance, right, the governor of Florida, supposedly, it was his idea first to offer runaway slaves from Georgia and from the English colonies the opportunity to become baptized as Catholic Christians and thereby protected by the Spanish in their freedom and have freedom. And so one of the Carloses, I can't remember if it was the third or the fourth, he's like, you know what? That's a great idea. I'll endorse that. And you know what I mean? So some people, because of the distance, and so forth, and of course personality and all that runs into it. You had some autonomy in the Spanish colonies for sure, but on paper, it of course was under Castile, under Spain.
Okay. Thank you.
Uh-huh. So if you guys notice, right, you'll notice when we do the northern colonies, there were royal colonies directly in which the crown was directly responsible for the people, and there were private business joint stock company based colonies, right? And then you also have proprietor colonies where you have one owner over the entire colony. And as you probably know, the person that stands out is William Penn of Pennsylvania. We'll get to him soon. Okay. So yeah, so that's about it, guys. But yeah, I really squirmed doing that economic thesis on slavery, you know. But I just thought, no, David Breon Davis goes just short of saying it. He gives the data to suggest it, you know. And of course, do I think it's both? Absolutely. I think it was a pragmatic decision, and of course, racism played into it as well. You know, it doesn't have to be either or. But yeah, just a bad combination of circumstances for the African slaves. Terrible. So we'll go over slavery again when we get into the causes of the Civil War. We'll get into I'll have things like on their conditions, on introducing them to Christianity, etc. I think that stuff is fascinating. It's fun to read. All right, but if you guys don't have any questions, anybody have any questions? Yes, Bryce.
Griffin, you can go first. It's all right.
Okay. This is not about what we read in this class, but in the second argumentative essay, you said bring up two sources of or supporting facts. Now, with that, did you want us to like, okay, since well, I thought of it two ways, either bringing outside sources into it for supporting facts or like supporting it with like two facts that you came up with like in the section that you read. So either bringing outside sources or some information from in it. Which one were you more looking for?
As far as looking for, I just assume that you're just going to use these handouts, but would I absolutely encourage you, enjoy, and reward you in points if you went outside this on another, because you're absolutely right. I like with number two, I'm extremely limited in my sources that I use. I would love that. I would love that. It impresses me. I think that is the exact type of scholarly behavior that I want to encourage, that anybody would want to encourage. And then also selfishly, right, is I might get to learn a really good source that you cite, you know, and be able to get my hands on that and learn something new on the topic. So absolutely, Griffin, if you want to do that, I would be very proud of you, and I would be grateful.
Okay, thank you.
Uh-huh.
Okay, and then I was wondering, are you going to grade our papers soon? Because I was wondering what's
Yes.
back, like, am I
Yeah.
formatting?
Sure. Yeah, I'm sorry, Bryce.
Sorry.
Yeah. I'm a, you know, this is just an explanation, not a justification. Okay, I promise. But for the first time in 3 or 4 years, I'm being observed in my in class, and I am just pouring everything into reading more sources, knowing my stuff, trying to make a little bit more clever of a thesis, et cetera, et cetera. But absolutely, I will make a note, okay, right here and now.
Cool.
I'll make a note to make a priority in of grading your stuff, okay?
Right. But I mean, if you just want to like, if you need to just grade like one of ours, so like you
Sure.
format because we're kind of following the same type of like progression, scanning it, adding evidence, analyzing it, then giving like what our description of what we're seeing and whether it's persuasive or not.
Sure, absolutely. No, and you absolutely are entitled to that. That should be part of my job criteria, is to give you some type of a written message in addition to points about where it stands as far as my subjective expectations.
Cool.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you. You guys are great. You guys are very, very intelligent and personable. This is a great class.
Well, thank you for teaching. Really appreciate it. Especially
No
the extra
problem.
Zoom calls. If we have any clarifications, it's great to be able to know that we'll be able to talk to you every week.
No, that's great. Thank you, Jake. I appreciate that more than you know. But I do. I'm sure a lot of people do, but I love my job. I love it. But I am going to let you go now, if that's okay. I have something with my father that I'm going to try to get to, but I don't think, I promise, I don't think it got me to truncate anything that I covered. But now that we are done, I probably should try to contact him. But you guys have a great week, okay? And I'm proud of you, and I hope to see you again next Thursday. And I honestly, I think it's gonna be kind of fun reading what you have written. So yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for your
All right,
time.
Thank you.
guys. Thank you.
Bye.
You guys take care.
You too.
Bye-bye.